welcome everyone. Can you hear me well enough? Thank you, Ralph. Back in June or so, I was challenged to do a spindle turning demonstration. So then a couple things got involved and it got pushed back a couple months, and now here we are. Well, part of that challenge was, and I think I'll paraphrase because I can't remember exactly how it was said, but not only spindle turning, but how to make two of the darn things look the same. So that's what we'll do. There's a process that many wood turners use, which is a little different than yours, Mark, where you put the thing back here and look at the horizon and match it. And I know people will make templates and actually fit the template onto the piece, which is very limiting because it only fits after you've made the very last cut to remove the wood, and then when it fits perfectly and there are no voids, it's great. But then when it fits and you look over here and see, oh, it's a little too low on one spot, you couldn't have tested it there until the whole thing fits. So I don't use either of those methods. In fact, I draw a diagram. All right, we're beyond the kindergarten stuff. We just have to add a little tiny bit, and then it's all over. So here's a diagram for a shaker peg, and you could, if I get it in the right place, at least momentarily, you'll see that the diagram matches the shaker peg. And what we have is a lot of complicated numbers that are probably looking like gobbledygook to you, but what's most important is these positions along the length of the piece, and then these numbers down here which set the radius or the diameter of the piece. Now it's important for me to have both of these numbers. In fact, right here you see R sub 16. This is radius in 1/16 of an inch, and so 4/16 of an inch is the spot here. But then I have diameter, and it's 4/8 of an inch. So when I draw this, I count up 1/16 of an inch, but when I measure it, I'm measuring the diameter, so it's 4/8 of an inch. So the same number works. So I calculate those numbers by measuring from my piece, and then I draw the radius on one side, but when I measure, I use calipers to measure the diameter of the piece. Okay, so that's what all these numbers are, and these are the lengths also in 1/16 of an inch, and then I just count on graph paper. Then after this is done, I'll photocopy it, and the blue graph paper disappears and you'd never see it on this piece. So after I've drawn that, I then make it on a little piece of hardboard, and I can place this up against the round piece of wood on the lathe, of course, when it's here. So the strategy will be to go through a system of taking the square piece of wood to, lucky catch, a cylinder, and you may be able to see the marks on it. Yep, they're showing up enough. That's well enough, good enough. The next step is then to use a parting tool and cut in and set some diameter. Marks have set the length. The parting tools are now setting the diameter. There are some pencil marks on there inside the diameter marks that I've made with the parting tool, and the strategy is to quickly bring the wood down so as close to those marks as possible, and in the very last phase bring the chisel over and just slice over and just skim off the pencil lines in the very last cut. And then we sand, and I only brought 220 and 320 grit paper, so we have to do a pretty good job. So here's the point where it's done with the roughing gouge only and right down very close, and then the next one is all the way finished. So I'll pass this around with this whole kit in there. And just to prove that, that's a good trick, let me tell you. And so, oh, what? Right to there with the roughing gouge. Well, I'll touch this part right in here. I'll do with the spindle gouge typically. So I use a roughing gouge for finished cutting often. So you'll see that a lot of you know me. I don't do things the usual way all the time, which endeared me much to a lot of the corporations that hired me, because the new things that I did usually worked much better than what they were doing, and I thought they would be happy, but it didn't always work that way. So when we bring this piece, that's what it looks like when it's on the lathe at the very end, and then I cut down to very small stubs. I don't slice it off with the lathe running very often, because when you cut straight across with the sharpest tool possible, the piece is spinning, at some moment the little stub is too weak to hold it exactly on the center. It starts wobbling a little bit, and the last cut pulls some fibers out and leaves a little hole where the fibers are missing. So I generally stop and I cut that off with a carving knife. Now, at the stub by the tenon, no one really cares if there's a little flaw there. In fact, you look on these pieces and they're not sanded at all. I just do a quick slice with the parting tool laid over on the side like a chisel, and then I didn't even double check the size on this, because if I drill a 1/2-inch hole and one of these is just a little bit snug, I just put a little sandpaper and go and then plug it in. So I have a lot of things in my shop that are held with these type of pegs. So I make them mostly for myself, and I do a class with duplicating for furniture parts, but instead of making long chair legs or table legs, which take a long time to do, when you make a mistake, you go back to another piece of wood like this, and you throw your mistake away, you start again, and you get an opportunity to practice a lot by making many of them. And I'll pass these around to show you that already there are slight differences, but they're really close, and when they're this far apart, that far apart, or isolated, you never know. And all right, they're not in the right order, but you'll figure it out. So I have what I need. I'll pass this around. And well, fancy you asked. This way. There's a key to this. Here's the line. Ah. Here's the line, and the parting, this dark spot up here is where I cut with the parting tool. So the parting tool is on the right side of this line. Here are two parting tool cuts. Right side of the line, right side of the line. This arrow means center the parting tool on this spot. Up here on the bead of the end, we have the parting tool cutting on the left side here, the right side there, and right on the very top of the bead. So you have to know exactly where we have this skinny line, but the parting tool cuts are really wide line. Which side of the parting tool cut is actually the reference? After I cut down in there, I mark it with pencil, and I mark it on the correct side. And then the lines are where they need to be. And this pencil works pretty well. But here's one that was sharpened with a knife so that it's very narrow. I'll just sharpen the pencil like this all the way down until I get to the lead, a little bit on either side. And then this fits in, well, I'd stick it in one of those narrow things, but it's being passed around. You'll see it for real in a couple minutes. So does that make sense? Now you think there is a madness or a method to the madness of duplicating things, making them the same. So I like to use, many people know that I like to use cup centers for a lot of things, but when I need to know where the center point is, I'll use center points. And I like these drives that have springy points because I can put the piece of wood between it and keep the lathe running and move the piece back and forth and grip and release. But when I'm sanding, I always take the tool rest out of the way, and in order to maintain the elevation and move things quickly, I'll move the banjo and pull it out of the way rather than take the rest out of here. So I end up moving the tool rest position and lose some of the advantage of the high speed exchange of wood pieces. So let's see. We need a piece of wood, and we need to find the center, and I need a felt tip, of which I have many, but none in my pocket, because just for you I laundered my smock this morning. Otherwise they would have been stuffed with pencils and pens and such. So you mark the centers, grip it, which is coming up, and I'll just push a little bit on one side, push on the other side. When I'm making a bunch of these, I will mark them, and I'll set them up, and I'll use an awl, and I'll mark the center points. Now I can place this left side into the hole, advance the ram, and find the hole that I had just made before. There it is, and now the piece spins and it's well centered, even though the drive spurs of the step center haven't been engaged yet. So let's see, put on a face shield, even though this is not the most dangerous of things. And let's see if I can do that without interfering with the microphone, which takes a little adjustment. And machine on. How fast are we going? Ooh, I didn't even check that. We'll live with that. So right now, there's very little driving it because the spurs aren't pushing in. Now it's gripped pretty well. Oh, it is if I tighten the tailstock. And we don't move the tool rest when things are spinning. And many have heard this before, but here's good habit number one in wood turning. I am spinning this piece of wood around so that all four corners pass the tool rest, so that I know that there's enough clearance, because my centering may not be absolutely perfect, unless it needs to for furniture purposes of having a square top. It doesn't matter too much. But if you rotate away from you, as opposed to what you see so often is people spinning the piece like this and rotating towards you, and then a finger goes down there and gets pinched. And if you do it this way, you will never ever pinch your fingers. And it's just a very simple way of being a little bit more comfortable with wood turning. So I will use 4 tools, nothing very big and fancy, because, well, 5 actually, but a roughing gouge, a parting tool, a spindle gouge, and a spindle gouge that once was much longer in both the steel and the wood, and this is just a pretty handy thing to use up close for teeny tiny stuff, and a chisel. So we start with the roughing gouge and just make this into a cylinder. Anchor, touch the bevel, raise the handle, make a nice arcing cut, and do this repeatedly. It's very gentle. It's a bevel guided cut. In fact, it's a shallow cove cut. I find it very easy to use a nice finish cut. It's smooth, it's not shaking around. I don't have to grip very hard. It's really close to a cylinder. And now I will do something that people say, what in the heck are you doing? And I will smooth this. And what is the what in the heck am I doing part? Who sees this as being very different than what would be considered a normal way? I'm sorry? Well, I'm planing. I'm using the side of this roughing gouge. But if you look at this tool and look beneath the pencil, you see the portion of the roughing gouge that most people use for roughing, and it's what I used to remove the corners. But if you hide that part, what do you see? First of all, there are two of them. There are two chisels. It's flat. From the halfway up, it's flat, so it acts like a chisel. This tool is sharpened like a finishing tool. It's ground to 1000 grit, and it leaves an incredibly smooth finish. So you just saw it. There it is, rough. Not bad, eh? And it does it. There's no special effort to doing that. Fortunately, we have more. Mark gave me a timeline, but I think we're going to be okay. So you think, oh, do you really have to mark this if you're going to be kind of approximate? Well, I can see the marking very easily when I look on the top, but when I put it to the side, I lose the real view. And does anyone know what I'm doing when I mark the center points? I mean, just, yes, I'm putting a dot there, but how do I locate it? Well, okay, so all of that is correct, it, except that the crosshairs aren't really in my eyeballs, but they're in front of my eyeballs because I can look right from this corner to that corner. And so I make sure that I move the pencil along that line, and I look down on it, and then I see the line going this way, and I move the pen over until it crosses that line, and I put the dot on the wood, so I don't have to draw the lines. Try it. It'll take you 5 or 6 shots at it, and you'll be doing it yourself. It's that easy. Draw the lines. What? Whoops, missed. See, it's even easier to do it without drawing the lines. But you could draw the lines with a ruler and all that stuff that takes sorry? Why bother? Sorry for being a wise guy about that. So I didn't even whack the points in there, but we're going to be close enough. And, ooh, I think we should lock the wheels. Three's enough. So now that I have the cylinder, let's put this out of harm's way. I place this template on the wood, and I start with the pencil. All I need is a relatively sharp one. I mark over here on the rightmost side. There are little notches. So I'll mark on the distance lines, and there's a little tiny notch in the wood here which helps out a lot. And if I don't wiggle the piece, I get these lines at very, very uniform distances. And now, the parting tool. So the first step is go to the very end, the outside border of this, and I didn't leave myself a lot of room on the right-hand side, probably a mistake, but we're going to go with it. And now what we have is the overall dimensions of the piece. Each one of these marks, ooh, I think I made a mistake. I did. I forgot one, and that's a very small mistake, so we can live with that. And I could tell because I didn't have the symmetry of the bead right at this spot. There are many strategies of how you want to do this. It's a good idea to have your template someplace close by so that you can watch after you build up a rhythm. You just find that it's a very easy way of doing things. I like to start in general with the biggest diameters, and that is right here, the very top of the bead. It is 8/8 or 1 inch in diameter. So I pick up my largest caliper, and I'm going to set it right here, and ooh, I'm really close. So this spot right here is fine. I don't even have to touch it with the parting tool. Just fortuitous at that stage. Now I go to the next one, 7/8 of an inch, and I have two locations, right here and right here, either side of the bead. One of them is to the right hand side, and I'm just going to begin that cutting right here. And the next one, ooh, let's double check. It's been a few days since I did this. Yep, that's it. And the next one is on the left hand side, so the edge of the parting tool is coming on the I just wobbled over and I removed that pencil line, which I didn't want to do. But because I did not make a change on this side, that line is still valid. I'm just going to push down and I haven't lost my dimension. Well, we'll find out at the end. So I'm beginning the cut right here, and I'll set this caliper into that little slot until I get that spot to the diameter of 7/8 of an inch. These are the world's cheapest caliper devices, which have scales on them which really aren't worth a hoot, and the points you can see have been severely rounded off, so I can use this on spinning wood without it grabbing in and throwing the tool at me. So, oh, even worse. Yes. So when you go to some of the shows like at the Big E where there's a tool vendor who comes by and has all sorts of very, very low-cost tools, and it's a really low-budget booth. In fact, he just puts some tarp on the floor and has boxes of stuff on the floor and aisles. It's the cheapest stuff ever. These are a couple bucks a piece. And you can see that they don't last long. Sometimes they break apart and you have to hold them together with tape. And I'm hoping the Big E show is going to be open this year because I need another bunch of these to replace the broken ones, because I have only 4 that I can actually work, and I'd like to have about a dozen. Okay, so I made 2 marks at 7/8 of an inch. I now move down to the next one, which is 3/4 of an inch. I find the spot where I have 3/4 of an inch, which is right here. There's only, 3/4 of an inch, no, is 6. It's right here. So, boom, I'm going to make the mark at 3/4 of an inch, and absolutely double check. Boy, you make a mistake on this and you're just way off. It's 3/4 of an inch on my right hand side of this line, and it's 1/2 inch on the left hand side. So we'll do the 3/4 inch line right now. I aim and I want to basically cut half of that pencil line off. Set it to 3/4 of an inch. We've got that. Now 3/4 of an inch is done. The next one is just under that. And I want to be on the right hand side of the line. This shakes around a little bit more. I don't care to use these as much as the F style. Next one is 4, number 4 there for 4/8 of an inch or half an inch. And it appears in 3 places. Here, here, and there. So I'm going to do all 3 of these half-inch spots. Just zips over there. And I'll do it right on here. Now you're going to watch this come right down near the edge. I don't want any fuzz on there. I want it to come right down on the line that is gone until it hits that 3/4 inch spot. And you see I need to be smoothed over just a smidgen, and down we go. And measure until it just slips over. Come on, there we go. Over here, same thing. This whole spot is the tenon, so I can remove the wood in the tenon zone. I also have a good bit more light on top of this at home, so this is the chisel cut. There we go. And the bottom is right there, and I just cut it a little bit deeper so that we know exactly where the bottom of this tenon is. So the parting tool is a chisel. You can use it just like a chisel. Leaves a really nice smooth surface. I've left a couple rings of extra wood here. This part over here didn't magically refill with wood. Well, it did, but with these little teeny tiny rings. Let's put them there and just see how long they last. So where am I? Oh, one more line, one more caliper. So let's do that. I try to get it just straight. Yes, we could. But if I do that with a typical parting tool, I make a little ridge in the tenon, which is going to be hidden, and who cares anyway. I didn't bring it, but I have a parting tool that I cut on an angle, and that's absolutely perfect for undercutting. So cut it on about a 60-degree angle. One side is longer than the other, works just the same way. This one is 3/8 of an inch in diameter. It's the one with the arrow. So this time, instead of placing the parting tool on one side of the line, I'm going to put the parting tool right over the very dead middle of that line, because that's the way the pattern is drawn. And now all the radii have been set. We can go back to the roughing gouge. Oh, no, not yet. Mark it with a pencil. Where did that pencil go? Oh, my special pencil. Ah, this. Okay. So this is a green one. I had a yellow one at home that I was using most of the time, and I just decided to make a spare. So I was looking for a yellow pencil. Now, with the template back up here, I am going to mark the precise position, which is the left-hand side of this ridge. Sorry, right-hand side of that ridge, left-hand side of that ridge, and over here, it's that diameter. Here, it's over there, there, and there. So I can get into all those spots, and now I have all of these lines marked on the wood. Even though I have big slots, I have tiny pencil lines that have set all the lengths. So that one can sit over there. Now we can remove everything that is above the lines. So I use a parting tool to cut down and in, and come in the other direction and do the same thing. I can shift to the chisel portion of the parting tool, roughing gouge. And I like to think of this as more a versatile gouge than a roughing gouge, because you can do so bloody much with it. And I'm getting pretty close. And because it's sharpened finely, it's a pretty darn good, really close to finishing cut. You can see though, the big wide mouth of this roughing gouge is too big to get into small details, so it's time to shift to a spindle gouge. And from the spindle gouge, I'll start up at the top of the bead, just begin this bead, anchor bevels, pull the handle up until I get the cut on the left hand side of center, sweep down. I cut one of those lines away, so I'm not going to go back there. I'm coming down to this line over at the very bottom of the cove, and then I want to take just a little bit more right out of that curve. And so this is where there comes a little tiny bit of interpretation, because I'm essentially connecting the dots. So I go over to the top and I slice over this line, and I come down to the next one, and I come down round to the corner. And I've left myself with extra work because I wasn't able to get that stub down to teeny tiny, but it's no problem because it just means a little bit of extra hand carving. There's just a little tiny ridge there that I want to fix, and we'll go back to over here. I can use the chisel portion of the roughing gouge, and that often will do the trick. And this is a true chisel, and I really like using it. It works extremely well. But if you want to see something that looks like a chisel, we'll go to a small, isn't this this is the $5 Robert Sorby chisel. I heard that they were being overpaid. So, and I can't do it. I can't get the chisel. This headstock is much bigger than mine. I can't actually get the chisel there. I didn't know that. I didn't make this up. This is a little bit of annoyance. I'm going to swing the chisel the other direction, and we'll see if we can do this. Come on, baby. There we go. So the knife angle is a little bit too steep. It should be at 45 degrees. And I want to just basically get that pencil line removed. Can I do it? Nope, still can't get that way. So I'm much more comfortable with the long point down when I'm planing. So this is just a pinch of an annoyance. We'll get there. I'm also trying really hard not to screw it up. So if I was home and I screwed it up, I'd throw it aside and make another one. And there's always one or two that get thrown away. It's over here somewhere. Oh, I lied. That's 180 grit, but we don't need it. 220, 320. And I usually sand with the grain because I don't want any circumferential marks, circles that go around the piece. And I'll often do the 320 step entirely by hand like this. So I was contacted a couple years ago from a design company, Cinca Designs, that makes some very fancy high-end furniture. And they started to make a bunch of turned tabletops and pedestals for the turned tabletops. And they started making things bigger than their lathes, so they contacted me and asked me if I would do some of the prototyping for them. And I did, and they liked the prototype. And then they said, well, would you do some of the production work? And I said, well, sure, I'll do that. And they're working in white oak. Who has cut and sanded white oak? It's not a fast cutting, sanding. It's tedious, right? Sanded into, yeah, so I did the stuff out of white oak and sent it back to them, and they were really happy. And, oh, I didn't finish. So this end I would like to slice off, and, all right, here, a souvenir, Bruce. It was a joke. It's just a little. Is it still intact? It's amazing. Pretty amazing. So. They, oh, yeah, Bruce saw my lathe. There you go. So when I made a really big piece for them, and they sent it back, and they go, oh, we just put finish on it. I said, well, you asked me to sand it, so I did. And they were really happy. And then I did more pieces for them. I said, we've been giving you more and more work because we really like the finish. I don't know how you get this sanding so smooth. I haven't told them yet, but I'll tell you. I sand it by hand. And there are no marks. There are no circumferential marks on it. And that's tedious. To go through the grits, it takes a half an hour to sand those big chunks. All right, so normally I will do a parting cut on either end, and I like my parting cut to be narrow. Best narrow parting tool I've ever found, available at fine yard sales everywhere. Sharpened just like a parting tool, used just like a parting tool. Well, if it looks like a parting tool and cuts like a parting tool, it's a parting tool. And then there's just a little tiny stub down there, and a very small saw And if you cut with a saw up against the wood, the set of the teeth is going to scratch things if you bump the edge of the wood. Well, just set it at an angle so that the teeth are always away from the piece. Cut it in straight like this. Set the tool in straight like that, but then tilt it a little bit. Draw back. This is a pull type of a saw. Tilt a little bit, pull. Tilt a little bit and pull, and you will never cut the piece that you're protecting, and you'll always leave a little stub, and then you slice that off with a knife, and that's done. The same thing needs to be done here, except that's carving. You could take it to a belt sander, I suppose, but what's the fun when you can actually carve with a knife and just slice these bits off. And you can see that one of the flaws here is that the end of this piece is going to have a little hole in it. And let's see where. So I'm often listening to the radio or a nice podcast, and after standing for a while, I go and sit in a very comfy office chair, which is covered with wood chips, and sit down because it's a fabric chair and they'll never come off. Well, some of them will come off and they'll be replaced by new ones. And I sit down and I do this and listen to some music and put on a cup of tea in the hot pot, and I enjoy doing little bits, sometimes 10 or 20 of these all at one time. And you know, take me 10 or 15 minutes, and it's kind of fun. Who has the tray of all the samples? Let's take a quick check and see where we are. What was that peanut gallery comment? Ever so slight little bit of fatness there. So this brings up the fact that we are connecting the dots. Here we go. And when I cut from this top of this bead down here and sweep in here, I could potentially put one more line in there to help me get that to be a little bit more regular. But when I get a rhythm going, they match really quite well. Now, if I give this template to any one of you, you may interpret the dot connecting a little bit differently than I do. But your whole series should match. My whole series should match. The two of them won't necessarily match. And that's where a computer numeric control lathe comes in. But this is hand-turned stuff. It should have a little bit of variability. So that's how you make multiple pieces by following a template like this.